It's almost ready. SpaceX's Starship 30 for the next launch is complete, but it requires more testing. Starbase's Starship Tower B goes up faster and faster. Will it go up in time to meet the goal? Is SpaceX really going to destroy the ISS for NASA? Why is NASA's moon rover being replaced by concrete? Essential building blocks for life on Mars. Does this mean life on Mars? My name is Felix, welcome to What About It, let's dive right in. Starship updates. SpaceX's Starbase is still the only place in the world able to support a full Starship launch. Absolutely unique in the world, but how does SpaceX do all this? Let's take a closer look at what they are up to. Pad B, which is growing daily. SpaceX is in the process of shifting from one Starship launch pad to two, doubling the launch frequency and giving redundancy for the entire project. As we talked about in the last episode, the tower's second module was installed atop Section 1 and the base on July 16th. 9 of these modules will make up the entire tower when it is fully stacked. Soon after the module was added, the massive CC8800-1 crane used to stack this beast of a tower was disconnected from the section. Then the load spreader used to disperse the weight of the modules evenly was lowered to the ground. Then they unhooked the module load spreader from the crane. Wouldn't it just be quicker to keep it ready, since the crane is only used to lift the sections of the second tower, right? Excellent question. The large Soren's crane isn't just used for the modules. It had an important side task. Install the elevator shaft inside of Module 2. The elevator shaft runs up the complete length of the tower. Same as on Tower A, it is essential for access. Delivering people and loads to higher points would nearly be impossible without it. We're talking 469 feet or 142 meters. These Starship towers are tall. The biggest launch structure in the world for the most powerful rockets ever built. SpaceX is racing to complete this second Starship tower as soon as possible. That night we saw Module 3 rolling down Highway 4 on its way to the launch site. The next day it was lifted up and set atop Sections 1 and 2. In case you remember, the previous 2 sections had been stacked 5 days apart. This one apparently was making up for lost time and was stacked a mere 2 days after Section 2. As we talked about in our last episode, the stacking of Tower B was slightly delayed due to Hurricane Beryl, which seemed like it might threaten Starbase. Now, if SpaceX had continued to stack the segments in 5-day intervals, the stacking would have taken significantly longer than planned. However, it seems that they may not have to make any delays and will simply speed up by stacking segments in shorter intervals. 3 sections are done, 7 to go, but the task is not getting easier. After stacking Section 6, the Demex CC8800-1 crane will be lowered and extended in preparations for stacking modules 7 through 9. If SpaceX is able to keep a steady pace, the extension will likely begin taking place in about a week. There is a possible roadblock ahead though, the readiness of Sections 4 and 5. These 2 sections were only rolled to Sanchez this month, which means they are quite a bit behind the other modules. Numbers 4 and 5 will be the next 2 sections to be stacked. They will house the delicate piping and electronics for the Starship's upper stage quick disconnect arm. The ship's quick disconnect supplies fuel and power to the upper stage of the Starship, the ship itself. This means it is quite a bit more delicate than the rest of the modules. It requires more care. These 2 modules, which were built in Florida, are currently at the Sanchez site right next to SpaceX's Starship high base. They are receiving wiring and cryogenic piping in preparation for final stacking. Of course, for SpaceX to stack a Starship with any of its launch towers, it needs something to lift them up with. Giant metal chopsticks. You know, typical rocket company equipment. At least if the goal is Mars. These massive lifting arms consist of 3 main pieces, the 2 chopsticks and the chopstick carriage. The carriage is basically the lift that attaches to the tower. Last week we covered the first chopstick being moved from its storage location at the port of Brownsville, roughly 15 miles down the road, to the Sanchez site at Starbase. SpaceX is storing all the modules for Tower B here. 1 part down, 2 to go. On the night of the 17th, the second chopstick was rolled to Sanchez. Almost done now. Then just the very next night, the chopstick carriage was transported to Starbase as well. And done. As a fun fact, this whole chopstick mechanism and much of the tower were transported by barge from Cape Canaveral, Florida to Boca Chica, Texas. With the chopsticks finally arriving at Sanchez, all the parts that are known to have been built are now safely at Starbase. The only piece of the tower still missing from Starbase is the previously mentioned Ship Quick Disconnect Arm, or SQD. We have likely not seen this piece because SpaceX decided to upgrade the SQD after their experience with Tower A. On that first tower, this arm needed extensive repairs after each launch. This does not yet align with SpaceX's goal of not just building the largest rocket of all times, but also making it rapidly reusable. This includes the pad. What good is a rocket that can launch 3 times a day if the pad needs repairs for weeks after each launch? Speaking of rapidly reusable rockets, let's move to the production site. This is where SpaceX builds those monster starships. This place never sleeps, it never rests, the gears of Starbase are turning 24/7. Starting over at Mega Bay 2, one of the things we were able to spot appears to be a new design for a Pez dispenser. Wait, a new Pez dispenser? But before I tell you about that, we've also looked into our channel metrics and over 2 million returning monthly viewers who have not yet subscribed. Help us improve the channel even further by double checking that you've hit that subscribe button so you do not miss our updates. While you're at it, give us a like and become a wise supporter for exclusive SpaceX updates. With it, you get access to daily Starbase photo galleries, including satellite, aerial and ground photos of SpaceX's progress and countless other extras on top. And no matter how much you decide to give, everyone gets the same supporter content and access. You decide what you want to give. Thank you very much. Okay, new Pez dispenser. Yep, only instead of dispensing questionably flavored candy, it dispenses advanced Starlink internet satellites. This design allows SpaceX to deploy their new version 2 Starlink satellites through a small payload door at the base of the payload bay. Relatively speaking, that door is actually roughly 7 meters wide. This provides a huge advantage as the payload bay door is wide but not tall. This is important because a tall door with a large footprint could risk structural integrity and require extra reinforcement. That would mean extra weight, which is one thing you really don't want to get on a rocket. More weight equals less payload to space. The current design ensures Starship has enough strength to survive the immense stresses of re-entry while having minimal structural bracing. The question now is, what ship is this new payload dispenser for? Any guesses? It is most likely destined for the shiny Block 2 Ship 33, which is over at the high bay. If this is the case, we should see the fully stacked Block 2 payload bay rolling over there. All eyes are currently on the Block 2 Starship. Ship 33 promises huge improvements over the current Starship design, lessons learned from the previous 4 launches. But we saw a different ship rolling to Mega Bay 2, Ship 30. Still an old design, but the next one to fly on Flight 5. Even though Ship 30 might still be Block 1, it has some serious upgrades, such as the heat shield. By the end of last week, Ship 30 appeared to finally have all of its new heat tiles installed. An added ablative layer below and a higher grade heat tile on top. Is this going to make it through re-entry? What do you think? Leave your predictions in the comments below. I love reading them. As a confirmation that work has in fact been completed, the team has finally dismantled the scaffolding that had been put up around the ship. We watched as SpaceX tore off nearly every heat shield tile on this ship to replace them with a newer tile that SpaceX claims is twice as strong as the older tiles. The added ablative layer underneath the tiles will be a non-reusable backup heat shield if some of the main heat shield breaks. SpaceX is making all of these improvements after its last Starship flight, during which the ship's heat shield had a few problems on re-entry. Coming back from orbital velocities can be highly dangerous, but why is that? Falcon 9 boosters seem to do it just fine, right? Yes, but they are not moving at the same speed. When the ships come back from orbit, they move nearly 20 times faster than a bullet, or 20,000 kilometers per hour faster than a Falcon 9 booster. That speed can cause the vehicle to heat up a lot when entering the atmosphere. This is why reusing a rocket's upper stage is so difficult compared to the first stage or booster. It has all the energy from the launch in it in the form of kinetic energy, speed. Anything without a very strong and reliable heat shield can't survive a re-entry. Ship 29 on the last launch showed this very epically. Hopefully all these improvements can ensure that Ship 30 comes back with a bit more of its flaps attached than Ship 29. Another big test for these new heat tiles will be an eventual static fire with Ship 30. Just after Ship 30 completed its tile work at the high base, it was loaded onto the special crab transport stand which had just arrived at the build site the night before. And on the 20th, Ship 30 was lifted onto the transport stand and rolled to Massey's, where it will perform a static fire if it hasn't already done so by the time you're watching this. But why is Ship 30 headed over to Massey's test site anyway? After all, we saw a static fire from the ship back on May 8th. If you don't know yet already, there is a rather simple reason. After the static fire back in May, we saw one of the ship's engines getting swapped. It is likely that during the static fire a problem was found, so SpaceX needed to replace the engine. It's simple. SpaceX needs to test that new engine, and what better way to do it than on their brand new static fire stand at Massey's. Ship 30 isn't the only new guest at Massey's either. On the night of the 18th, we saw the new booster test tank, which had been assembled in Mega Bay 2, roll over to Massey's. It was lifted the next day. SpaceX's pace at Starbase is second to none. Daily movements of prototypes, new developments, new launch towers, it is an ant's nest. To the surprise of many, it was lifted onto the new Can Crusher 2.0, a contraption SpaceX built to test structural load on Starship hulls to simulate engine, launch, and atmosphere-related forces during a launch. We knew this Can Crusher was going to be used to test Block 2 Starships, and given that this is a Block 2 test tank, it makes sense. That's not a surprise. The reason this was so surprising is that Can Crusher 2.0 isn't complete. In fact, we covered the next section of the Can Crusher that was constructed just last week. The next segment is still next to the new Can Crusher, which is waiting to be installed. There are two possibilities as to why SpaceX decided to do this. The first is that it is possible that SpaceX doesn't need the full Can Crusher to perform this test on the test tank due to its size. That would also mean we're likely going to see a full-size booster in Can Crusher 2.0 after this test tank is sufficiently crushed. The other possibility is that this next segment needs to go on after the tank has already been placed inside. But that leaves one question: why did they need to build this? What do you think? Leave your ideas in the comments below and let's see who gets closest. My guess is to keep the booster from running away. Now that we've explained what happened with SpaceX's Starship, let's move on to another massive SpaceX-related development: Mighty Dragon. As some of you may know, NASA plans to deorbit the International Space Station into the Pacific Ocean in 2030. The ISS is getting very old, and according to NASA, it can't be renovated. You sure? Unfortunately, this has to happen, as the station will be over 30 years old then. Having astronauts up there at that point would simply be very dangerous. NASA is a government agency, so there are contracts for everything. And this contract was just awarded to SpaceX. When you first think of vehicles that SpaceX could use to complete this task, two come to mind: a Dragon capsule used to ferry astronauts and cargo up and down, and a Starship. Another option would be the announced SpaceX Deep Space Logistics Vehicle Dragon XL. It is planned to be used for Lunar Gateway supply missions. SpaceX gave a massive clue though. Per a new render from SpaceX, none of these will be their option. Instead, as you can see here, they seem to be planning to modify the existing Cargo Dragon 2 into a more powerful vehicle. This would be necessary due to the station's massive size and weight. Although space is a zero-G environment, inertia still certainly exists, and the ISS has a lot of it. 420,000 kilograms or 925,000 pounds at 17,150 miles or 27,600 kilometers per hour. Big boy. According to SpaceX's render, which is subject to change, the new Cargo Dragon will have 46 of the small Draco thrusters that power the Dragon attached to a larger trunk module. This will give it 4 times the thrust. This is opposed to the 16 Dracos that Dragon currently features. 16, 46, yeah. As you can imagine, with 30 extra engines, the spacecraft has to carry more propellant. This is why the spacecraft's trunk module will be lengthened to over double its size to hold much more propellant inside, 6 times the propellant to be exact. This all makes sense, as they need a capable vehicle to deorbit the ISS. Some have rightfully asked why SpaceX's larger rocket, the Starship, should not be used to complete the task. Well, it all seems to be centered on the nature of the contract. It seems that SpaceX must have needed to submit a set design to NASA before the contract could be awarded. Given the Starship's unknown fate, they likely don't want to make it the final design, as it will certainly undergo major changes in the next 6 years. Another reason is that the contract states that the vehicle has to be able to complete the deorbit on its first launch. This likely means that SpaceX wants to have the most proven vehicle they can. This new Dragon variant would be very similar, and it wouldn't be as much of an undertaking to test and develop. It will be exciting and a little bit heartbreaking to see the fate of this magnificent space station unfold. All of SpaceX's testing and development are ultimately intended to prepare it for missions to the Red Planet and beyond. Let's take a quick look at another mission that is currently ongoing on Mars. This time I'm not talking about Perseverance, but rather about Perseverance's older sister, Curiosity. Curiosity has been on the Red Planet since 2012 and has since begun climbing Mount Sharp, a 3-mile-high Martian mountain. Currently, Curiosity is in Geddes Vallis, a valley channel on the edge of Mount Sharp. During an expedition in June, the rover found itself running across a large rock, which gave out under the 1-ton load of Curiosity. That older sister is heavy. Curiosity had run over a large geode that had been deposited millions of years ago in the dirt by large landslides or water flows. The geode cracked and revealed these large yellow crystals within. These crystals contain pure sulfur and are the very first of their type to be found on Mars. While sulfides or other minerals containing sulfur have been found on Mars, no pure sulfur has ever been located. This discovery is incredibly rare and highly valuable. Sulfur is an essential ingredient in 2 of the amino acids that make up protein. The ground along Geddes Vallis is littered with more geode-like rocks likely to contain their own sulfur crystals. So not only did Curiosity find an important building block of life, but she also found a multitude of crushable rocks containing it. Unfortunately, not all missions turn out the way Curiosity did. We recently saw the end of a mission that hadn't even gotten its chance. This story has a crazy twist, wait for it. This is NASA's Viper lunar rover. It was announced back in 2019 as part of the Commercial Lunar Payload Services program, CLPS. The plan for this rover, built by NASA's Ames Research Lab, was to be delivered to the lunar South Pole by Astrobotic's Commercial Lunar Lander. Here, it could investigate the permanently shadowed regions that may contain water. But just recently, NASA announced that they would be canceling the project $450 million into development due to budgetary overruns. What? However, the rover is already complete and essentially ready for launch, so how can it go over budget now? In Viper's case, the rover isn't the reason for the latest round of cost overruns. Instead, Astrobotic's lander was delayed. Due to the mission's nature, the rover can only launch during the summer of the lunar South Pole. It occurs roughly at the same time as Earth's summer. This means that the rover's launch window is shorter. If it misses that window, it may need to wait another year. When it comes to spaceflight, time is money. Having the engineers on standby for another year can push budgets even further. Now here comes the crazy twist you've been waiting for. Despite the Viper rover being nearly complete and pushed over budget due to Astrobotic's lander, NASA still plans to pay them to land their lander on the lunar surface. But if it's not landing with Viper due to lunar seasons, what is it landing with? Well, it looks like NASA will pay hundreds of millions of dollars for Astrobotics to land with a mass simulator, a weight, a block of concrete. In other words, NASA is paying to transport a block of concrete to the moon. If I'm being honest, this is just short-sighted. Unfortunately, like many things at NASA, this decision wasn't based on science or even truly budgets. Instead, this decision was made based on a seemingly arbitrary constraint placed by Congress. Congress. There is still hope though. Congress could approve a larger budget for Viper, however, time is running out. I do hope this happens, as the lunar South Pole is one of the most interesting places on the moon. It is also the proposed destination for many of the future Artemis missions and possibly even the first lunar base. This means having as much information about this place as possible is important and almost a necessity. A slab of concrete won't do, even if it was expensive to get it there. That's it for today. Remember to smash the like button, subscribe for more awesome content. This is what fuels the algorithm and it helps us immensely. Check out our epic shirts in your favorite Space Nerd store. A link is in the description. And if you want to train your space IQ even further, watch this video next to continue your journey. Thank you very much for watching and I'll see you again in the next episode. Slightly delayed to do. Haha. Can ensure that ship 30 comes back without burping. Budget. Congress.